Time for our next fireside session. We're looking at the future of EVs and mobility. So let me welcome Virendra Gupta, Vice President at Move at Tata Communications, joining us on the stage now. Virendra, how are you?
Yeah, doing okay, Neil. Yeah.
Great to see you. Thank you ever so much for joining us. There's so much to cover off in this particular session. We could fill an entire show talking about the future of EVs and mobility. But let's start with global EV adoption, a huge subject again on its own. For you, how are different regions tackling challenges like charging infrastructure? Because that's something that always comes up when it comes to EV adoption.
Okay, your question is about that how countries are handling or tackling charging infrastructure challenges, Neil?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So I think as we know that in electric vehicles, I think charging at the right point of time, that is very critical. And what I see is that different governments, different countries and different regions are taking different approaches. Of course, I think many governments are providing subsidies or incentives to set up charging infrastructure. And then you can see different business models where government is participating or even the public-private partnership models you can see, or only private, private entities participating in setting up charging infrastructure. But still, I feel that remains a challenge from the electricity supply perspective in many countries, mainly in developing countries. Same time, I think governments are also taking initiatives that can they supply electricity to these, charging stations through solar power or renewable energy sources. So I think that is also, some attention is being paid, towards that.
Let's move on to innovation when it comes to batteries. For you, how are all the new battery technologies like solid state, fast charging, impacting EV cost, performance, and most importantly, scalability?
As far as batteries or electric vehicles in general are concerned, I think there are certain concerns today in minds of customers. I think one of the concern is related to range, how much with one charge will be able to drive electric vehicle. Second, maybe also related to cost. I think batteries today account for major portion of the electric vehicle cost. So there is also a second concern of customers. So these new technologies, of course, are striving to address all these concerns. Apart from solid state, I'm hearing nowadays even about silicon anode. Some research is happening even in that direction. And of course, all these technologies today are in means still some of the technological challenges need to be resolved in these. But I think if we are able to increase the range with one charge or able to reduce the cost, it will also help in adoption. And of course, the charging time, that is also another critical parameter, which I forgot to mention, that how much time it takes to charge the battery. I think that is also very critical. So if all these parameters, I think we are able to improve. And I see that continuous improvement even on the existing battery technologies is happening. It will increase electric vehicles adoption.
Absolutely. Let's look at autonomous vehicles now. And for you, what role will autonomous driving play in the future of mobility, especially alongside the shift towards EV?
I think autonomous driving or intelligent cars, I will say intelligent autonomous cars, because you also need to combine autonomous with the intelligence. And of course, software-defined vehicles. All these new technologies, I think most of the auto OEMs are choosing electrical vehicle as the platform. And I think different levels of features are being built from the autonomous perspective. Now that will these features, when they are available as part of electric vehicle, of course, they will make driving much more safer, and maybe it will also improve experience of the customers when they use electric vehicles. And I feel that as part of that, of course, the software development, software defined vehicle, that technology will also try to move some of the processing to the cloud, and that may also help in reducing, I think, number of failure points within the vehicle, because the number of, I think, the processing units you should be able to decrease in electric vehicle. So I think autonomous cars, of course, will help in that direction, and electric vehicle has been actually chosen as the platform, for building all these capabilities.
You mentioned earlier about the difference in the more developing world when it comes to infrastructure. How important is it that we're mindful that there's different levels of maturity when it comes to infrastructure for helping with EV, helping with smart autonomous vehicles, depending where you are in the world? How crucial is it that we are mindful of the different levels of maturity in different areas of the globe?
I feel that from the infrastructure maturity perspective, there is very large gap. And not only from the infrastructure perspective, even if you look at from the road discipline perspective, you will find large difference. So, and electricity supply, I think in some parts of the world also is a problem. And I think still solar energy, solar panels, I think those also have not been set up. I think that is also not so much prevalent in the developing countries. Still, there is a work in progress. So I feel there is a large difference in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the road discipline, and in terms of the electrical, I think, energy supply, whether it is renewable or otherwise. And when so electric vehicle adoption will also get affected because of that, because I think there is always a concern that if I am out of charge, then whether I'll be able to find a charging station to charge my vehicle. Also, whether electricity supply will be available when I need to charge my vehicle. And I think in some parts, say, for example, if we take example of India, even in metros, sometime I think electricity supply in some parts of the city may be a concern. So I think all those problems will have to be addressed, and the roadside discipline is also another problem. For example, today itself, I was reading about some traffic jam happened with some autonomous vehicle when someone, I think some vehicle did not follow certain rule on the road. And that is very common, I feel, in certain countries. So even autonomous car technology still need to handle those situations of indisciplined driving, inadequate infrastructure. So what I feel is that, of course, as governments are taking steps, electric vehicle adoption will increase because there are other problems which are emerging now in the cities, increasing pollution levels, etc. So, and of course, governments also want to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. So they will provide more incentives, and maybe electric vehicle adoption will increase. But when the adoption increases, more electric vehicles are on road, infrastructure will also have to improve. Autonomous cars, in my opinion, in developing countries will find first place maybe in very controlled environments, primarily maybe say in campuses, airports, etc., where you are able to provide that controlled environment. So that can be sweet spot for autonomous cars, I feel, in developing countries in beginning.
You were mentioning there about government policy, so let's pick up on that point for a moment if we can. How do you feel governments are helping to shape the EV landscape at the moment through regulations, incentives, as you just said? And for you, what other policies do you feel are needed?
So I think governments, as I mentioned, that I think there are multiple drivers why governments are encouraging adoption of electric vehicles, environmental concerns, reducing dependence on fossil fuels, petrol, diesel, and of course, shortage of petrol, diesel leads to inflation or even the dissatisfaction in the country if there is shortage of that, and then dependence on the foreign currency for that. So governments are taking steps in terms of tax incentives or subsidies. I think those I can see primary vehicles to encourage EV electric vehicles adoption in the country. What I feel, I think one major area where government really need to focus is on renewable energy supply and maybe encourage more setting up solar panels at community level, at individual level, so that dependence on conventional source of electricity supply reduces. So I think that is one area where maybe governments need to focus more. Another area what I can think of is that maybe because for electric vehicles, battery is very critical component, and of course raw material I think raw material supply will also play very important role there. So the local production of batteries and also maybe the battery recycling and the safe disposal of the batteries, I feel there also governments may have to pay slightly more attention.
Let's move on to an area that I find absolutely fascinating, and that's how EVs and alternative mobility options will transform urban environments in the future. How do you see those changes, and how do we plan ahead for them?
So I think urban planning, so what I understand your concern is that how the planning, urban planning, etc., should happen, right? To
Correct,
take care
yes.
of the, I think, needs of electric vehicles and maybe autonomous cars, for example. So I think that planning really need to, so I think there may be two cases there. One is that brownfield and another is of course greenfield. And for brownfield, the planning I think need to happen in different manner. And for greenfield, when any greenfield project is being planned, I feel that the consideration should be given uh, for EV fleets or autonomous car fleets operation. For example, if you're setting up a new airport or if you're setting up a new facility, I think then you will have to plan for charging infrastructure or adequate electricity supply from the very beginning. Similarly, if you are developing certain area of the city, I think that's how planning should happen, in my opinion. So I think the proactive urban planning is very, very important to take care of these new category of vehicles.
Let's move on to the supply chain here. How do you feel the EV shift is really affecting the automotive supply chain now, and what companies do you see, what strategies do you see companies using to adopt so they can be part of this EV shift?
So of course, I think in case of electric vehicles, if we see, I think there is a change in the suppliers, kind of suppliers, which will be because say, for example, electric vehicles need electric motors or I think batteries. So those suppliers are of course quite different than what has been traditional suppliers for I think petrol or diesel vehicles. So there is a change, and there is a I think change in the supply chain. what I feel, I think one of the most important part there may be that sourcing of the raw material for the batteries. And I read stories about I think some of the material what is used in today's batteries, the mining practices, etc., are questionable. So we'll have to consider all that, and of course, then these raw materials, their production also need to ramp up if the electric vehicle adoption increases worldwide. So those aspects need to be also considered, and for that, in my opinion, battery recycling and that supply chain, reverse supply chain becomes very, very important. And so that is one aspect. I feel that software defined vehicle, that architecture can also help to reduce pressure of some pressure from the supply chain because a lot of processing you can offload to the cloud or to the edge. So you can really reduce number of compute units required in the vehicle. So that can also help a lot, software, I think, defined vehicle architecture.
And the final area I want to explore is how consumer demand is influencing the future. How do you feel that the changing consumer preferences are really influencing the future of EV, whether that's design, functionality, the types of vehicles that are being produced, the technology they have? How do you feel consumer demand and preferences are influencing the future?
I think one of the major concerns today of consumers is upfront cost of the vehicle, electric vehicles, and that is still higher than being petrol or diesel vehicles. So I see that I think auto OEMs are really focusing on that how that upfront cost can be reduced. Uh, so that is one, of course, driver. Second driver is related to the I think range in one charge of the battery, how much you are able to drive the vehicle, how that can be increased, how the I think charging time of the batteries can be I think reduced. That is, I think, the second aspect where maybe there is a focus in when you are designing electric vehicle. And then, of course, how can you make electric vehicle drive more safe? And there I feel that even role of AI or that comes in where in the battery management system, I think if we can really look at that, because there have been some incidents where I think electric vehicle or electric scooter caught fire. So how we can prevent those conditions? So there may be some simple use of AI predicting the heat buildup. I think all those can be used, and then maybe proactive alert can be given or some action can be taken. So I feel, I think all these safety concerns are also driving design of electric vehicles.
Absolutely. Well, that seems like a good place for us to wrap things up in terms of talking about consumers. So Virendra Gupta, Vice President at Move at Tata Communications, thank you so much for joining us here at Manufacturing and Mobility Live.